People have been whispering about Yellowstone, videos of bison on highways, stories of elk wandering into towns. The internet says the animals know something we don't. But is it real? Or just another viral panic? To cut through the noise, I reached out to talk to someone who's out there every single day. A Yellowstone park ranger. No filters, no headlines. Just his account of what's really happening deep inside the park. So, without further delay, let's get into the truth. You know, I've been a backcountry ranger out here in Yellowstone for close to 10 years now. I've seen a lot. Harsh winters, late spring, summer crowds, wildfires. Every year there's some new rumor that gets folks worked up. But this summer, man, this summer's been something else. It started with a few videos. Someone posted a clip showing bison running down a road, dust clouds billowing behind them. Then there was another one, grizzlies walking single file along what looked like a service road. Pretty soon, my cousin in Ohio was texting me at 3 in the morning, asking if animals were fleeing Yellowstone. Fleeing. That's the word people keep using. I get why it's unsettling. If you don't live here, if you don't see the rhythm of this place day in and day out, it's easy to think something's off. But let me tell you what I've actually seen. Not online, not through a lens, but with my own boots on the ground. Last week I was out on patrol in Hayden Valley, just as the sun was breaking the horizon. The air was cool, heavy with that earthy smell of sage and wet grass. I had my binoculars up scanning the valley floor. There was a small group of bison moving toward the park boundary. Big, slow-moving animals. Nothing frantic about them. They weren't charging. They weren't stampeding. They were just walking, grazing here and there. A calf trailing behind its mother, stopping now and then to swat at flies. I radioed it in like I always do. The wildlife team wasn't surprised. This time of year, we expect some herds to edge out of the park for a bit. The grasses down low are still lush from spring runoff. The higher meadows are starting to dry out in spots. Bison and elk follow the green. Always have. It's not a mass migration, not a sign of anything catastrophic. In the following days, I logged more movements. A small elk herd meandering south. A pair of mule deer grazing near some private cabins outside the park fence. Normal stuff. No coordination. No sense of urgency. Just animals doing what animals do. Now, about that grizzly video. I saw it too. Bears walking down a paved road in single file. Looks eerie if you don't know better. But we checked our trail cams, our cell units. Nothing matched. One of our wildlife techs pointed out the tree cover, and road markings didn't line up with any location in Yellowstone. Most likely filmed somewhere else, or hell, maybe even AI generated. That happens now. The Park Service flagged it later, but by then it had already spread like wildfire. When I come back from patrol, we all talk at the ranger station. We compare notes. The old hands joke about animal panic season every time social media catches a wildlife clip out of context. They're not wrong. Most people don't realize that Yellowstone isn't fenced in like a zoo. There are no walls. Wildlife moves freely in and out of the park year-round. Elk in particular, they're notorious for crossing boundaries in summer. They seek cooler forests, shaded creek beds, sometimes private ranch lands. Same with bison. It's how they survive. One evening, I asked one of our veteran biologists, she's been tracking herds here for over 20 years, if she'd seen anything unusual. She shook her head and said, same patterns as last year. Same patterns as the year before that. If they were evacuating, trust me, we'd know. And she's right. We'd see different signs. Mass movement, yes, but also restless behavior. Panic. Starving animals refusing to graze. None of that's happening. Then there's the volcanic chatter. People say animals sense tremors before humans do, that they're running from an eruption. Look, I get the fear. Yellowstone sits on a supervolcano. I'm not blind to that. But we've got seismic stations, gas monitors, GPS sensors all over this park. If something was brewing, we'd see tremor swarms, ground lifting, unusual gas releases. We'd smell it. We'd feel it. Right now, all those instruments read normal, green, stable. Yesterday I did a long hike near Lamar River, spotted a lone bull elk grazing near a riverbank, watched 2 coyotes tumbling and playing like pups in the distance, a young grizzly cub pawing at a fallen log for beetles. I didn't see gates being closed, or ranger cabins being emptied, or herds of animals pouring out like some disaster movie. On the ridge, I saw a small group of pronghorn heading north, not south. A fox darted across my path, stopped to size me up, then vanished into the sage. If anything, the land felt normal, quiet, peaceful. So here's the deal. From where I'm standing, there's no mass exodus, no hidden panic, just animals moving as they always have. Seasonal shifts, natural rhythms. I'll say this though, if something ever did change, I'd be one of the first to know. I've got my boots on the dirt every single day, but right now, I'm not seeing what the internet is screaming about. So my suggestion is, don't play into it. We're good out here, no need to panic. A few weeks ago, specifically around the second week of August, I was doing a routine caving trip in Monroe County, West Virginia, roughly northwest of the Oregon cave system. I've been exploring caves for over a decade, have decent knowledge of the area, and had mapped out some unexplored leads based on old survey references. It was supposed to be straightforward: descend, chart the passages, collect some rock samples, and head home. That's all it was, until I stumbled onto something I never thought I'd see. I'd started around 9 a.m. to get an early start. The region had heavy rain a few days prior, so I had to keep an eye out for water levels in the lower chambers. I remember the air felt surprisingly musty despite the dryness underground, like the place hadn't been touched in years. Part of me rationalized it as stagnant air pockets, but it just felt off. At some points, I was focusing more on the odd smell than my footing, which is a terrible idea in a wet environment, and I nearly slipped on some slick limestone outside one of the narrower crawls. I'd gone deeper than usual because the older maps suggested a drop-off that wasn't documented in detail. I kept hearing water trickling in the distance, so I assumed there might be a subterranean creek or waterfall that could connect to a lower chasm. Instead, I ended up breaking into what seemed like a brand new passage, like no human had ever physically gone through, because there was zero trash, zero footprints, zero scuff marks. Everything was coated in this pale, almost chalky dust that flaked off when I touched the walls. I'm not proud to say it, but I started thinking about local folklore. Someone I spoke with the previous weekend had mentioned that people sometimes see strange pale figures in the woods around the Greenbrier River or near Cranberry Wilderness. He never called them anything specific, just said that folks described these tall, crawling, elongated things that didn't quite look human. I remember rolling my eyes at the time, thinking it was more of that Mothman mania that people around here get caught up in. That conversation popped into my head while I was climbing through that dusty corridor, and I kind of shrugged it off. After maybe an hour of crawling through increasingly tighter squeezes, the passage opened up into a small chamber that surprisingly had a slight updraft. This was weird because often deeper passages have minimal air movement, unless there's another opening or a connection to the surface. The slight breeze felt warm too, which didn't make sense at that depth. I took a short break, turned off my main headlamp to conserve the battery. I rely on a good LED with backup to be safe. And that's when I noticed the faintest scuffling noise. It wasn't a dripping sound or any normal echo I'm used to hearing in caves. It was something moving, very lightly, almost like the shuffle of bare feet on rock. I turned my light back on and scanned the chamber. At first, I saw nothing. I can't even describe the feeling. I've never felt so alert and paranoid in a cave before, and I've had plenty of close calls with flooding passages or unexpected drop-offs. The scuffling stopped, and just as I was deciding maybe it was just the echoes of my own movement, I caught something in my peripheral vision on the left side of the chamber. It was behind a small outcrop, near where a chunk of the cave wall had collapsed. I was certain I saw something pale that was not just limestone. It was like a smooth texture, but with subtle movement, as if it were breathing or shifting. I'm second-guessing it now, but I swear at that moment I thought it was either a lost animal or some bizarre calcite formation tricking my eyes. My first instinct was to pivot my headlamp. As soon as the beam hit that side, I heard this weird scraping, almost like nails on rock, and then something scurried out of view, fast, with a fluidity that no normal person could manage in that terrain. My mind went blank. I physically froze for a second, and I'm not proud of that. You know that feeling of extreme tension in your chest when your body can't decide whether to run or fight? That's what I experienced. I forced myself to move and step forward to see if I could catch a glimpse of it. The chamber had a short corridor beyond that outcrop, but it was too dark and my light wasn't hitting the far wall at the angle I wanted. I inched over, pressing my back against the opposite wall, and tried to see around the collapsed rock. That's when I saw a shape, pale white or gray, definitely not covered in fur or anything. It was crouched, almost folded into itself, and it had arms or legs, maybe both, bent at grotesque angles. The shape was facing away from me at first, hunched over. I couldn't see a face, just the back of a head, elongated and bald. Then it turned slightly, like it either heard me move or sensed my light. I can't describe its eyes well. They reflected the light a bit, but not like an animal's eye shine, more like a dull glint, as if the surface was slick. I never got a clear look at its mouth, or if it even had a nose. From the limited view I had, the face seemed concave, like it sank inward around the eye sockets. The limbs were long, too long for the torso, with spider-like joints. And the color was uniform, with no obvious patterns except what might have been darker shading around the joints. This entire time, we're talking maybe 10 seconds of me trying to process what I'm witnessing. Then that scuffling started again. The creature, entity, whatever it was, started to move further into the recess of the corridor, almost sideways, with its arms bracing itself on the walls. Hindsight tells me that was the moment I should have turned around, but curiosity overrode good sense. I followed it. I didn't rush, though. I was in that cautious crouch, half expecting it to jump at me. The corridor turned sharply downward, and I saw it slip out of view over a ledge. And here's where I went into that ledge carefully, placing my feet into small footholds. It was about a 15-foot drop. I rigged a rope, thinking I'd just rappel down and see if there was a new chamber below. I lowered myself maybe 10 feet, shining my light around, trying to see if it had disappeared into a tunnel. That's when I heard a hiss, like a slow exhale or a suppressed screech. My entire body tensed. I realized that, in my haste, I was in a terrible spot. I basically had no mobility on that rope if something decided to climb up or reach for me. If this was some unknown creature, it would have caught me completely off balance. I decided then and there to pull myself back up, unfasten the rope, and back out of that corridor. I remember telling myself that I would come back with a dedicated team, or at least one other person. But at that moment, my nerves were shot. My heart was pounding so hard that after I pulled myself out and started heading back to the main passage, I had to stop and catch my breath in the darkness. I'd never felt that kind of panic in a cave before. It took me a solid couple of hours to navigate my way back to the surface because of the route I'd taken. I kept glancing behind me, shining my light into the darkness, expecting that thing to be following me. But all I heard was my own ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water. When I finally saw the entrance beams of sunlight, it felt like I was leaving a nightmare. I must have spent what should have been an 8-hour excursion in closer to 12 hours, and it was almost dark outside by the time I made it out. I didn't realize that until I checked my watch. Time seemed to warp down there. I've told exactly 2 friends about this, both of whom are experienced cavers in West Virginia and Kentucky. They told me they'd heard third-hand stories of crawler humanoids, or pale beings, seen in deep caves, but they always chalked it up to local tall tales. One said that a buddy of his claimed to see something similar in the bowels of a cave near the Virginia border, but that guy was too freaked out to ever go back. It's apparently more common in whispered circles than you'd imagine. No one's put any formal data out there that I know of. It's always secondhand or rumor. So I've been wrestling with this because everything about it contradicts standard wildlife knowledge. There are albino critters like salamanders or fish living in caves, but I've never heard of any truly human-shaped being, and it's not likely some rogue hermit living deep within a nearly unexplored passage. Logistics alone would be impossible. That corridor had no sign of smoke or leftover food or any human trace. This was something else entirely. One friend floated the idea of an undiscovered species, but this was too large and too agile to be undiscovered in a fairly popular caving region, even if that exact passage was off the usual routes. I've turned this over in my head 1,000 times. Could it have been a trick of the light or my imagination? But there's no rational explanation for that scuffling or the hissing sound that practically vibrated in my ears. I don't know what to do with it, other than try to talk to more locals or cavers who might have had the same run-in. Part of me wants to go back, but I'm also genuinely dreading the idea of going back alone. It's almost like I believe it's still down there lurking, and I can't get rid of the feeling that once you see something like that, you're not supposed to unsee it. Does that make sense? Anyway, I wanted to send you this report because I know you keep track of these encounters for your YouTube channel. People might dismiss it, say it's too bizarre, but it's the truth as best I can convey it. I wish I had more definitive proof. I've been out in the Achafalaya basin cataloging reptile populations for a comprehensive survey we're doing at the university. It's not the first time I've been deep in the swamps, but this was the first time I ventured so far down the bayou alone, mainly because I've always trusted my instincts out there, and prior to this, it was perfectly fine. I hadn't really planned on spending the night, but sometimes you spot something that just keeps you going, and before you know it, the time's flown by. I remember it was late in the evening, around 7:30 p.m., and the sun was setting behind the cypress trees so fiercely that it bathed everything in an orange glow. I had my small John boat tied up near a cluster of stumps and was about to pack it in for the day. I was taking some last notes on the alligator populations, specifically around the old channel that runs near Lake Fosse Point, if you know the place. I'd heard some unusual splashing in the distance, but honestly, it's Louisiana. Everything splashes, everything moves. You learn to ignore it unless it's out of the ordinary. But this time, the noise had a strange echo, almost as if two heavy bodies were thrashing around. I'm used to hearing gators snatch prey, or sometimes big nutrias can make a ruckus, but it didn't sound like that. It was more frantic. Normally I'd pass it off and keep going, but I had that gut feeling that told me to investigate. So, I hopped back in the boat and rowed a little ways in the direction of the noise, which seemed to be coming from a shallow, muddy bank, closer to a row of thick palmettos. I didn't see anything at first, just some broken branches, something that looked like fresh claw marks in the mud. They didn't look big enough to be gator tracks, yet they were definitely not raccoon or nutria. I remember thinking they looked eerily canine, but much larger than you'd expect, like if a wolf had come dipped its paws in the area, which shouldn't be the case in central Louisiana. Wolves aren't typically around here. Coyotes, sure, but not with prints that size. About 20 yards further, there was this overhang of moss-draped cypress hiding a bit of the bank from view. That's where I found it, or what was left of it. It was definitely canine, but not like anything I've personally seen as a researcher. Its head was elongated, almost wolf-like, yet the snout was thicker. The teeth, some were broken, but the canines were massive. It looked vaguely like a coyote on steroids. But again, there are morphological differences here that made no sense. The front limbs were longer than I'd expect, powerfully built, and there was noticeable muscle mass still intact, even though the body was partially decomposed. The entire form was shockingly large for a wild canine, like it might have stood a good 6 or 7 feet on hind legs. If it did that sort of thing, I don't even know. I took measurements. I keep a tape measure with me for tagging gators. The torso alone was close to 4 feet in length. The back legs were definitely canine in structure, but the shape of the foot pad was off. I can't exactly articulate it better than that. It had something about it that seemed more primeval. Yet the strangest part was the condition of the corpse. There were no gunshot wounds or typical injuries you might find if it had been taken down by a bigger predator. The flesh was torn in some places, but it seemed more like it had been in a violent struggle with something equally formidable. The back of the neck had deep gouges, almost like claw marks. I thought about documenting it fully for the department, but something made me pause. You see, about 6 years ago, I was part of a migratory bird study near Lake Morepa, and I stumbled upon something odd back then. A downed deer that had these bizarre slash marks across its belly, as if from a large cat. Except the rangers told me there hadn't been confirmed panther sightings in that region of Louisiana for decades. That deer carcass was whisked away by folks from some agency I'd never heard of, and I was told not to speak of it. Something about additional testing they were doing, but it made me wary of reporting any abnormal discoveries through official channels. I'm not typically a conspiracy theorist, but there's something about the hush-hush nature of weird finds in these swamps that spooks me more than any story my dad used to tell around the campfire. Anyway, back to the canine. It was lying there in this unearthly stillness, but even though it was already dead, I had that primal sense that told me I needed to watch my back. The swamp around me got quiet. No frogs, no cicadas, not even a single bird chirp. It was dead silence, which is so unnatural out there in summertime. It unnerved me enough that I did a quick perimeter check with my flashlight, scanning past logs and cypress knees. A part of me was convinced something else was lurking just beyond the tree line. Against my better judgment, I gathered a few samples, some fur, a few broken teeth, and I debated trying to haul the entire carcass back to the boat. But that thing was heavy, easily over 20 pounds in its partially decomposed state. It would have taken more than just me to move it, and I wasn't about to wait around for help after dark. The mosquitoes alone would have carried me away. Plus, the deeper part of my gut just said, you do not want to be messing with this after sundown. So I snapped some pictures on my phone, and here's where things got even weirder. About an hour later, already well on my way back to the boat launch near Whiskey Bay, my phone just died. I'd charged it fully before we left campus, so it shouldn't have drained so quickly. Now, phones can be finicky in the humidity. Moisture can short them out, I get that. But it's still suspicious, given what I'd been photographing. The next morning when I got back home, the phone finally turned on, but the photos were corrupted. Just pixelated green and black squares. It's like I never took a clear shot, which drives me crazy because I kept checking them right after I took them. And they were definitely visible then. The samples I took are still in my possession, but I swear, I had an unmarked SUV parked near my place 2 days afterward, which is not something I usually see in my neighborhood. Could be coincidence, but I've been in this field long enough to know that coincidence usually has some puzzle pieces missing. I ended up freezing the samples in a small domestic freezer I keep for wildlife remains. I do forensic analysis sometimes. I told my immediate colleagues about the find, just a handful of them who I trust. They're all as stumped as I am. One of them joked it could be some leftover stunt from the old Rougarou legends, or an escaped exotic wolf from a traveling carnival. But he was half serious. We do get a lot of unusual sightings in these swamps, and the legends of the Cajun werewolf, or dogman, or whatever you want to call it, have been around for generations. I can't help thinking about that time we had severe flooding after Hurricane Ida. I was involved in rescue operations for various wildlife. The water was so high that it displaced creatures from the deeper parts of the swamp. We saw packs of feral hogs in places they'd never been, enormous alligators tooling around in suburban drainage ditches, even a rumored black bear sighting on the outskirts of Lafayette. It wouldn't blow my mind entirely to think that something bigger, older, might have been forced out of its secret domain and ended up in conflict with local predators, or, as crazy as it sounds, maybe even with something else that hunts the hunters. I keep playing the scenario in my head. If it was in a fight, what took it down? Another dogman? Some other predator I've never even heard of? Worst part is, I haven't seen or heard a single mention of this anywhere in normal circles. No local news, no chatter among the game wardens. It's as if it never happened. I wouldn't be risking my credibility sharing this, except I figure if anyone's going to put it out there for others who might know something about dogman or cryptid canines in Louisiana, it'd be you. I've heard stories of sightings in neighboring states, Arkansas, Mississippi, of these upright canid creatures rummaging around farmland or scaring the life out of late-night drivers. But I've never heard of someone finding a dead one, especially not in the Achafalaya area. I might try to run a DNA test on the samples when no one's looking in the lab, but it's tricky. You can't exactly slip something like that into a legitimate study without eyebrows going up. And frankly, I'm a bit afraid of the consequences if word gets out that I have tangible evidence in my freezer. Even sending you this email feels like I'm putting myself on some watch list, but I can't just sit on this forever. If it's a known phenomenon that certain agencies keep quiet, I guess I'll find out soon enough. I half expect some federal agent to show up at my door, demanding I hand over everything. What still haunts me is replaying the scene, wondering what else saw that creature, and if it's still out there. The quietness in the swamp that day wasn't natural. I've spent enough time out there to recognize when even the gators are spooked. Whether that means there are more or something else is stepping into the territory, I can't say. Regardless, that's the full scenario as it happened, at least as best as I can recall in all its messy details. I've tried to reconcile it with logical explanations. A malformed coyote, a stray wolf-dog hybrid, something ravaged by disease. None of it makes enough sense. The proportions were too unusual. The muscle structure, especially in the forelimbs, was too pronounced. And those claw marks on its neck, they suggest it wasn't the alpha in this encounter. Something bigger or meaner took it down.